Hello, this is Sky News at 1. It's 2 o'clock here in Krościenko in Poland, where thousands of Ukrainian refugees are arriving looking for safety, sanctuary and security. A seventh day of violence, 21 dead in Kharkiv. Russia claims to have captured Kherson. The fight over Ukraine's freedom intensifies. The two sides to hold a second round of talks as the outskirts of Kiev are hit and the convoy continues its slow advance to the capital. Tension as tanks advance checkpoints in operations as the city's mayor says his people are ready for battle.
The enemy is pulling its troops closer to the capital. Bila Zerkva was shelled last night. Fighting continued in Bucha and Hostomel. We are getting ready and we will defend our city.
Ukraine's president stands firm in the capital, claiming almost 6,000 Russians have been killed in 6 days of war. Triumph over tyranny. Joe Biden praises Ukraine's bravery with a vow to force President Putin to pay the price of his deadly actions.
When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving.
Neutral status at the Paralympics. Athletes from Russia and Belarus will be allowed to compete, but not in the name of their countries. And a show of solidarity. MPs unite in applause as the Ukrainian ambassador attends PMQs in the Commons. Hello, good afternoon. This is Sky News at 1, live from Krościenko in Poland, one of 8 border crossing points with Ukraine. Today, as tens of thousands of families in Russia's firing line fear for their future, President Putin's forces have taken control of a southern port city, it's been claimed. Well, let's take you through the latest developments today. Another round of talks between Ukraine and Russia is expected to take place later on today. Russia says it's in control of the southern city of Kherson, while Kharkiv in the east is under constant attack. And Russian and Belarusian athletes will be allowed to compete as neutrals at the Paralympics Winter Games, which starts in Beijing on Friday. Well, Sky News has verified the following video of a missile strike in Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. The attack caused damage to a university and a government building which are opposite one another. They are located in the centre of Kharkiv, and this strike follows yesterday's attack on the city's Freedom Square. Sky News has also verified the following video of a residential area to the northwest of Kiev, located in the city of Irpin, which is around 16 miles away from the Ukrainian capital city. The footage shows damage to a building after an attack from Russian forces. This morning, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky reacted to some of the latest developments.
Just think about this figure. Almost 6,000 Russians died, Russian servicemen, within 6 days of war, a figure without the enemy's losses during the past night. 6,000. To receive what? To receive Ukraine? It's impossible. It will not happen with rockets. It will not happen with bombs, tanks, any strikes. We are on our land, and there will be an international tribunal to prosecute them for the war against us.
Well, within the last hour, Ukraine's foreign minister said that Ukraine is ready for diplomacy, but will not accept any Russian ultimatums.
Вимоги росіян, в принципі, залишаються незмінними.
Russia's demands remain the same, as Putin announced in his address before the war started, where he basically declared the war. Now we are ready for talks, for diplomacy, but we are not ready to accept any Russian ultimatums at all. When new talks will take place is unknown at the moment.
Well, joining me now is Diana Magnay from Moscow. Alex Rossi is in Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, and Sky's Adam Parsons is in the western city of Lviv. Diana in Moscow, first of all. Diana, it seems that the Russians are advancing further and further into Ukraine, but how is it being portrayed in Russia, and what do people know about what is happening?
They don't really know very much. The head of the independent pollster Levada said as much. He said Russians don't know really what's going on in Ukraine. And the government is closing in on the kind of messaging that they can get. You know, this is a government that over decades now from Soviet times has excelled at propaganda, and it is going into overdrive at the moment. You are not allowed to call this war a war or an invasion. You can only call it a special military operation. You can only put on any kind of media the official lines. There are rules that have been sent out to bloggers on what they can and cannot say about this, one of which says that this is an operation for peace. It's just unfortunate that they have to take these means to get peace. There are going to be classes at school whereby school children study Vladimir Putin's speech and his essay and take his view of the history of Ukraine and the history of Russia as gospel. You know, it's real textbook propaganda stuff. And, for example, the strike on the government building in the centre of Kharkiv yesterday morning is being portrayed in the media as a Ukrainian strike. I have yet to see how they will react to, for example, the fact that Babyn Yar, the Holocaust memorial site in the centre of Kiev, was damaged when a Russian airstrike hit the nearby television tower and a communications network there. And 5 people were killed. The Defence Ministry has said nothing about those casualties, and they insist that they only target military infrastructure. So there is a very specific message being sent out on state TV and across all media. And in fact, they've just closed down 2 of the remaining independent radio and TV stations. So it's going to be very difficult to get your news. There are restrictions on Facebook. There are ever more restrictions coming in, essentially. So the messaging is very tight. But, for example, Alexei Navalny, the jailed opposition leader, despite the fact that he's sitting in jail, he does manage still to get his message out via his lawyers. And on Instagram today, he posted saying to the Russian people, the only thing that we cannot be ashamed of at the moment is the 6,000 plus people who were detained for attending anti-war rallies over the last week. And I call on you all to go out every day and at the weekends and say that and fight against this war. He said that he'd grown up in Soviet times and the mantra of his childhood had been fight for peace. And that is now what people need to do, and that it is not enough just to say we are against this war, that they actually have to go out and fight for peace. And I think there are a lot of people in this country who are incredibly opposed to this war. Then there is a large chunk of people who just don't know enough and are scared to draw judgments. And then there are a large people who swallow the Kremlin's line on what this all is and actually think that this is a programme for peace and that they are denazifying a country which is overrun with nationalists, which really couldn't be further from the truth.
Diana, thank you very much for bringing us the latest from Moscow. Well, let's go into Ukraine. Alex Rossi is in the city of Dnipro in the south of the country. Alex, we've heard of more attacks today. We've heard of air fights in the sky. What is the situation where you are? How are people there keeping safe?
These are very grim and very dark days for Ukraine. There is fear across the country, obviously, but there is also huge resistance as well. Now, in terms of the fighting, it appears that Russia is changing its tactics. It is gearing up its assaults. It is shelling civilian areas. Kharkiv, for instance, to the east of where I am, the mayor of Kharkiv says there's no part of that city which has now not been hit by an artillery shell. So the net is closing around these places. On the south coast, on the Sea of Azov, it's a similar picture. Ukraine's pretty much been cut off on that coastline now. Very heavy fighting, we understand, In the city of Kherson, there are pictures now of Russian armour in the centre of that city. It's disputed whether it's fully under the control of Russian forces, but certainly the fighting is still very fierce there at the moment. Moving to the east, Mariupol, another strategically important city, that's pretty much cut off from what my contacts are telling me. Very heavy shelling there as well. The people there, the medics are struggling to go into certain areas to find the people that have been injured because it's so very heavy. That, of course, is in civilian areas as well. Now, the fear of where I am is that Russian forces, once they have consolidated their gains there, will push up the Dnipro River through Zaporizhia, which is fortifying itself, another important place, and then towards where I am in Dnipro. Now, that would cut Ukrainian forces pretty much in half. Now, the other worry for people, I was talking about the change of tactics that Russian forces are making, is that it appears that they are now following a template which we have seen in other conflicts in recent history. Think about what happened in Syria. The Russian Air Force became pretty good at bombing civilian areas and killing civilians there. Whole neighborhoods. I remember walking through parts of Aleppo which have been completely destroyed. Rebel-held areas in Yarmouk, in Damascus, again, absolutely battered by continuous Russian firepower. Then, of course, there's the story of what happened in Chechnya, Grozny in particular, much of it just leveled by Russian artillery. Now, I suppose the bigger question of all of this, when you see the fierce resistance from Ukrainians, is how on earth does Vladimir Putin think that he can win this war? He might win the battle, but how can you possibly forge a peace when you have annihilated so much of this country? But certainly it's turning into an extremely gruesome campaign, and I think that's borne out by the uptick that we're now seeing in the number of people fleeing the country. The United Nations says those figures, more than 860,000 people have now fled this country. There are train stations which are swamped with people trying to get on the last trains out, people getting in cars, heading for those border crossings where you are. So a really ugly situation and extremely worrying. But I suppose the thing I'd like to underline is that the resistance also is enormously strong. Every Ukrainian that you speak to that is manning a fortification or making Molotov cocktails or holding a Kalashnikov, they say that they will resist this Russian invasion with everything they have, because what they are fighting for is so very important, and that is the soul of the country. That is a country which they hope will have a future as a free and democratic place.
Alex Rossi there, thank you very much, and hope you and your team are doing all you can to stay safe. We've got a bit of breaking news. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine has apparently spoken to the Pope and asked the Pope if he could intervene to talk to Vladimir Putin about humanitarian corridors. Now, we don't have any more information about it than that, but presumably that is to try to get people safely out of the country if they so wish to. It is a long way from Kiev to Lviv and then to the border with Poland. And we know that there are Russian troops in rural areas. So apparently the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine has spoken to the Pope and asked him to speak to Vladimir Putin. There are going to be talks later on today between the Ukrainians and the Russians. We will see if that has any bearing on that. Well, let's go back to Ukraine a little further west to Lviv and talk to my colleague Adam Parsons, who's there. And Adam, those who've made sometimes pretty perilous journeys across the country get to Lviv, and then from there they then sort of decide where they're going on to, possibly to one of the crossings like this one that I'm at, but maybe also by train.
You're probably going to Poland from here. That station behind me has a line that goes directly from Lviv out towards Poland. It's the journey that my team and I made yesterday coming in here. It is packed with people, to be honest with you. The trains that are going off towards Poland are very squashed, and it is all women and children and pensioners. Very few men at all on those trains. Those who are very often foreign students or workers who are here. But the refugee story of this is becoming pressing. UNHCR says about 850,000 people have left Ukraine probably around half of them heading towards Poland. That is about 2% of the population of Ukraine. You put that into context. If that was Britain, that'd be about 1.25 million people leaving in the course of a week. And a lot of them, those people on the journey, are around us here. Lviv is an old, architecturally beautiful city, but here it has now become effectively a large refugee camp of people coming in here, either arriving here and wanting to move on to another country, or in many places, remember, they're coming to Lviv to get away. They don't want to leave Ukraine. They just want to get to a bit of Ukraine that is safer, and they have come here. Let me show you, though, a little slice of kind of humanity amidst all this sort of grimness. The resilience of children, I have to say that the time I've been reporting on this never ceases to amaze. You can be in the midst of a country at war. You can be in a city like this, which is struggling to cope with the influx of people. And yet, nevertheless, if you're a kid, an adventure playground is still an adventure playground. Let's take you and show you a bit more of what is going on in Lviv at the moment. If you can sense smoke in the atmosphere, that's nothing ominous. It's coming from these braziers. People around us are trying to keep warm. These are full of firewood, and actually, frankly, anything else that they can lay their hands on tends to get burned, and so it's an acrid atmosphere, and it adds to that slightly foreboding sense that you have. You can see that absolutely enormous pile of firewood over there, and on the other side of this crowd, there's a big cooking pot with somebody there. You can probably see it over there, stirring a vast container of soup. The generosity of volunteers, whether it's been on the Polish side of the border or whether it's been here in Lviv, has been quite impressive, quite intoxicating. And here you have the Red Cross Centre, where they are handing out food and drink and giving support to people who have ended up here. And you talk to people, and everybody, it sounds obvious, everybody has a story. Everybody tells you a tale that all too often involves horrendous trauma. We were talking earlier to a man called Igor, his sister Anna, their extended family were with them. They had left Kharkiv yesterday. They live in a flat about a kilometre, he said less than a kilometre from where the missile struck Kharkiv, causing such devastation. He said when that happened, they were on their way to the station. They heard the sound of bombs. Anna, his sister, told me they were on the train, and she said we were like this with our hands above our heads. Their feeling is that the bombs were aimed not just at military targets. She said they were aiming us and our children. And of course, that's what's led them to leave Kharkiv. They don't want to leave Ukraine, though. And I think that's another part of this story. We talk about 850,000 people, and of course that number rising all the time, leaving Ukraine. There will be, who knows, maybe the same number, again, displaced internally within this country, who have moved out here to the west because they think it is safe. It is safe at the moment. The fighting is a long way from here. But this is still a tense and nervous city. There are roadblocks. We had to show our identity today in front of soldiers with assault rifles. And the air raid sirens have already gone off a couple of times here today. Those were drills, of course. There are no air bombardments certainly attacking this city. So what you've got is this blend of people. Hello. Got the blend of young people like this. You've got people who are relieved to be here, but the irony of Lviv at the moment is that people are relieved and happy to be here, but nobody who's coming here actually wanted to be in Lviv, wanted to be at home. They didn't want to be at a country in Europe at war.
Adam, thanks so much for that. Well, as Adam was saying, these people are making these journeys, often a really stressful journey to Lviv, and then they are then coming on to other border crossings. And we're just going to move the camera around and take a look at what's going on here at Kroschenko, where I'm at the moment. If you look beyond the immediate scene, which is relatively quiet at the moment, I have to say, there are a few cars coming picking people up. But on the other side of the border, there is a great deal happening. That is where the cars are travelling from inside Ukraine and depositing their cargo. A lot of abandoned cars on the other side. Apparently, we're seeing a lot of things like food packets, litter, because people are waiting there for really long periods of time. Some have travelled. One family we spoke to today set off on the 24th from the Donbass area. And the people who are on that side are mainly men, because they are the ones who are staying behind. And then as they come across here, mainly women and children. We've just seen a family being loaded into a car here. It's often a mum. It usually seems to be weighed down with a huge number of bags, all they can carry. Children with a little backpack on, usually carrying a cuddly toy. And they're also carrying plastic bags with food. They're obviously being given a certain number of supplies on the other side for their journey when they get to this side. And then when they come to this side of the border, they're being met sometimes by family, sometimes by friends. We've seen quite a lot of lovely reunions today, people who haven't seen each other for a long time. But also volunteers who are coming to pick people up. We've seen cars here from Switzerland, from the Czech Republic, from Germany, from Finland. So people are coming from all over Europe to help here. And then they go on to transit centres. There are 3 from this particular border where they will then be processed. They can stay for longer if they need to, if they haven't got anywhere to stay. They could then be moved on to another part of Poland, perhaps. And this is a relatively small border crossing, but there are 2 much larger border crossings, bigger ones, which are closer to Kiev, north of here. And we are seeing a lot more supplies coming in through those routes. A lot more big trucks. And what is often happening here, perhaps if we look at this family here or just loading into this car, what's often happening is we're seeing cars are coming, often full of stuff, full of bags of perhaps old baby clothes, perhaps food. And people in the cars are depositing those things with the volunteers here. And then the empty car is waiting and is being filled up with families who are being taken back inside Poland. Well, these pictures show one of the larger border crossings, and you can really see the tiny numbers, the large numbers of tiny children that there are. We're going to take you away from these images for now and take you across to Beijing, where we're getting this press conference from the International Paralympic Committee.
However,
let's listen in.
With just 48 hours to go before the opening ceremony of the Beijing 2022 Paralympic Winter Games, this is a very difficult time for the whole world as well as the Paralympic movement. This week, the IPC has needed to navigate its way through 2 very difficult issues: the safe passage of the Ukrainian Paralympic team to Beijing and the breach of the Olympic truce by the Russian and Belarus governments. It goes without saying that the ongoing situation in Ukraine is horrific, and our thoughts, prayers and well wishes are with our member, the NPC of Ukraine, its delegates, athletes, officials and the wider Ukrainian population. I am delighted to say that just hours ago, the Ukrainian team, consisting of 20 athletes and 9 guides, arrived safely here in Beijing. This is a wonderful achievement, and I'm sure you share my delight that they are safe and will be able to compete at these games. For this, I would like to thank the IPC management team and the Beijing 2022 Organizing Committee for their tireless work behind the scenes. Today, the IPC Governing Board met to discuss the current situation and its impact on the Paralympic Games and the wider Paralympic movement. As you can imagine, it was a very intense and emotional meeting with all board members eager to share their views on the matter at hand. Over the last week, the board and myself have also had many conversations with IPC members, and we are all grateful to you for sharing your views and your opinions on this subject. The points raised, both publicly and privately, by our member organizations fed into the internal discussions we had over the course of the last several days. The 14-strong board, which features 8 Paralympians, was united in its condemnation of both Russian and Belarus governments for breaching the UN resolution in the week leading up to the opening of the Games. The board was also unanimous in deciding that such actions could not go unnoticed or unaddressed. In deciding what action to take, the board was guided by the IPC's core principles, which include a commitment to political neutrality and impartiality and an unwavering belief in the transformative power of sport. These are key components of the new IPC constitution that was approved at the 2021 IPC General Assembly held just over 3 months ago. The board also needed to work within the framework of the IPC handbook, the rules and regulations that govern the Paralympic movement and which are approved by the IPC membership. In that respect, it is currently not a membership obligation for an IPC member to ensure compliance with the Olympic truce. We were also conscious that decisions of this magnitude invariably end up in law courts. Therefore, our decision-making needed to be driven not by emotions, but by our constitutional purpose and handbook. This approach is consistent with how we tackled the Russian doping crisis ahead of the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Back then, we were able to prove that the RPC was unable to ensure compliance with and the enforcement of the IPC's anti-doping code and the World Anti-Doping Code. These obligations are a fundamental requirement for all national Paralympic committees and clearly highlighted in the IPC handbook. This time round, the situation is different. There is no nexus between the recent actions of the Russian and Belarusian governments and our membership obligations. In particular, there currently is no membership obligation for an IPC member to ensure compliance with the Olympic truce. This means that within the current IPC rules framework, suspending either NPC Russia or NPC Belarus for breaching the Olympic truce is something that would be overturned in a German court of law. Working within the parameters of the IPC Constitution and the IPC Handbook, the IPC Governing Board has taken the stronger possible action in response to the gross violation of the Olympic truce by the governments of Russia and Belarus. The actions we have taken were announced earlier this evening. Ahead of them becoming public, we informed Beijing 2022, the IOC, and briefed all IPC members participating in the Beijing 2022 Paralympic Winter Games. The measures are as follows. The RPC and NPC Belarus will participate as neutrals at the Beijing 2022 Paralympic Winter Games under the following conditions. All their athletes support personnel will participate in an individual capacity as neutral athletes support personnel. They will compete under the Paralympic flag and the Paralympic anthem. They will not be included in the medals table. The RPC delegation must cover the RPC symbol on their uniforms in all official ceremonies and sporting competitions. The Belarus delegation must cover the Belarus flag on their uniforms in all official ceremonies and sporting competitions. All technical officials attending the games from Russia and Belarus will be listed as neutrals under the Paralympic flag, as will coaches from the respective countries involved with other teams. The approach set out on points 1 and 2 above will also be followed in relation to the participation of the RPC and NPC Belarus in the 10 parasports governed by the IPC. The IPC Governing Board has also decided, both in its role as the global guardian of Paralympic movement and as international federations for 10 parasports, that it will not hold any events in Russia or Belarus until further notice. This will include World and European Championships, as well as all sanctional level competitions, such as World Series, World Cups, and Grand Prix events. The IPC Governing Board also recommends that all parasport international federations, regional organizations, and the IOSDs follow the same approach. An extraordinary IPC General Assembly will be held in 2022. Under the IPC Constitution, 6 months' notice must be given before this event can take place. At this meeting, IPC members will be invited to vote upon whether ensuring compliance with the Olympic truce should be a membership requirement, and therefore, any IPC member breaching that requirement in the future could face suspension or termination under the IPC rules, and whether to suspend or terminate the membership of Russian Paralympic Committee and Belarus Paralympic Committee. The Paralympic honor bestowed to Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, has been withdrawn. Paralympic orders, the highest accolade that can be presented within the Paralympic movement, will be withdrawn from the following individuals: Dmitry Chernyshenko, president of Sochi 2014 Organizing Committee, now Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation. Dmitry Kozak, Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, now Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Office. Oleg Sido-Molotov, Chief of Interagency Security Command Center, Sochi 2014, now Deputy Foreign Minister. Alexander Gorovoy, Deputy Chief of Interagency Security Command Center, Sochi 2014, now First Deputy Interior Minister. Given the time constraints and the need for the IPC to focus on the delivery of a safe and successful Paralympic Winter Games under these unprecedented circumstances, the IPC Governing Board will reconvene after the Games to further discuss this matter and any additional action that may be required. It is deeply disappointing that such action is required. However, the IPC Governing Board believes it to be necessary in order to hold governments to account for actions that impact directly on the Paralympic movement, the Paralympic Games and Paralympic athletes. This is especially so given the origins of the Paralympic movement arising out of the horrific events of Second World War. Now that this decision has been made, I expect all participating NPCs to treat the neutral athletes as they would any other athletes at these games, no matter how difficult this may be. Unlike their respective governments, these Paralympic athletes and officials are not aggressors. They are here to compete in a sport event like everybody else. The eye of the world will be watching the Paralympic Winter Games in the coming days. It is vital we show the world leaders through our sport that we can unite as human beings and that our true power is found when we promote peace, understanding, and inclusion. This is at the core of what the Paralympic movement does and what it stands for. We should not lose sight of this now, no matter what the circumstances. In some of my conversations during the past several days, I've heard the sentiment that sometimes you just have to do the right thing no matter what the consequence. I suspect some of you in this room may be thinking the same. I want to take a moment to address this view because I think it is misplaced in these circumstances and actually can result in real damage to our movement. The question I will ask is the right thing for whom? The second thing I'd offer is that being faithful to our Constitution and membership obligations is in fact doing the right thing. We are membership, and our constitutional purpose, our collective belief in the power of sport, is not something that we put on and take off whenever it suits us. Instead, the principle of political neutrality and the genuine belief in the transformative power of sport must be our North Star, our strength, or perhaps our lifeboat, especially when we find ourselves facing the darkest side of humanity. These commitments are ones to embrace, not shed, during these critical times. To close, I hope I have been able to share with you the difficulty of today's decision. At the IPC, we pride ourselves on sticking to our principles when making difficult decisions. Today, we could not abandon the principles that have got us this far, no matter what the public pressure. As a membership-based organization, we value the views and the ongoing support of our members. This is why we are eager to organize the extraordinary General Assembly later this year, rather than wait until 2023 General Assembly, so that the members can have more of a say on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd now like to pass the mic to Jitske Visser, the chairperson of the IPC Athletes Council. Jitske, over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Good evening, everyone. As the chairperson of the IPC Athletes Council, it's disappointing for the athletes and all game stakeholders that with 48 hours to go before the opening ceremony, the talk is not of sport, but global politics. We've also been greatly concerned to ensure that the Ukrainian Paralympic delegation could safely get to the Games, and it is wonderful that they arrived earlier this day. Since this crisis began, the IPC Athletes Council has been eager to listen to the views of the global para-athletes.
Well, that there, the International Paralympic Committee, who have confirmed what we heard a little earlier today, that the Paralympians from both Russia and Belarus can compete. The Games start on Friday, but it will be competing neutrally. Also announced some personal sanctions against both President Putin and President Lukashenko of Belarus. We're going to talk more about this in a moment, but first there's a bit of breaking news from the mayor of Mariupol. This is a city in the south of Ukraine. He is reporting mass casualties as a report of a sustained Russian attack. So Mariupol, we know that this is an area that the Russians had advanced upon. The mayor there says that there have now been mass casualties there as the result of a sustained Russian attack. We'll bring you more details on that as we get them at Sky News. But let's cross to Sky's sports correspondent, Tom Parmenter, who joins us now. And Tom, we heard there more details from the International Paralympic Committee. Also, really, them expressing how difficult it is for them to make these decisions. We've seen so many sporting events stepping away from Russia and Belarus, but making the point there that the Paralympians who are expected to take part on Friday are not the aggressors, and that we can unite as human beings and promote peace, understanding and inclusion. And they're hoping that perhaps some good will come of the Russians and Belarusians competing. What has been the UK reaction so far, Tom?
As you say, the IPC are trying to pick their way through this and are trying to rely on their rules and handbooks to allow them to have come to decisions that are kind of challengeable and that will stand up if they are challenged further down the line. And the position that they have come to with the organisers of the Winter Paralympics is that Russian and Belarusian athletes will be allowed to compete, but as neutral athletes, and that the Russian Paralympic Committee, will not appear on the medals table. And that is a position that has divided a lot of opinion across the Paralympic community. There's a fair degree of anger. We were talking earlier to Richard Whitehead, one of the prominent runners in the Paralympics, who appeared at the Winter Games and the Summer Paralympics as well. And he told us that he was very disappointed with the decision. He said that it doesn't send out the right message. It's not a firm enough stance from the IPC. And that has been echoed today by Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, who has responsibility for sport within her department. She says, "I'm extremely disappointed with the IPC. This is the wrong decision, and I call on them to reconsider. They must join the rest of the world in condemning this barbaric invasion by banning Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing." She goes on, "We will consider the full range of options in protest of this decision in consultation with UK Sport and the British Paralympic Association. I will also be meeting with my international counterparts this week to discuss how we can respond collectively." The clock has been very much ticking for the Winter Paralympics because they start on Friday. There is due to be a team that was made up of Russian athletes taking part in the para ice hockey this weekend. So they were really up against a tight deadline, but the decision that they have come to is one that is certainly not fully well received across the Paralympic community and further afield.
And Tom, I understand that Everton Football Club is stepping away from its Russian sponsors as well. We've heard from a number of other football teams who've done this already.
Yeah, they're one of a number of sporting clubs who have links to Russian based money, and really their connection is one of Alisher Osmanov, who is an Uzbek oligarch who has had a commercial relationship with the club for some time, sponsoring their training ground, and also has the naming rights for Everton's new stadium. A big centrepiece of their plan in the next few years is to move from Goodison Park down to the waterfront on the River Mersey, and Mr. Usmanov very much part of that financing of that big move. And so Everton have been trying to work out how they go forward. They have shirt sponsors, they have various sponsors connected to the club that are connected to Mr. Usmanov's businesses in Russia, and the club have said they can confirm that it's suspended with immediate effect all commercial sponsorship arrangements with the Russian companies USM, Megafon and Yota. So these are seismic decisions being taken within sport at speed, and as we can see, a variety of standpoints being taken, some much more hardline than others, and the Paralympics have said that they have tried to plot a course that respects their rules and principles and is also not going to penalise those athletes who, as the Paralympics have said, are not the aggressors, and they expect during the Paralympics in Beijing for them to be treated like any other athletes.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Now, President Biden has used his State of the Union address last night to say that Russia is now more isolated from the world than ever before. And he said that Vladimir Putin will pay a high price for invading Ukraine.
6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos. But while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run.
Well, from Washington, Sally Lockwood joins me now. And Sally, what has been the reaction to the State of the Union address? Do Americans think that Biden is doing enough for what is happening in Ukraine?
Well, there's been largely bipartisan support here in America for Joe Biden's response to this Ukraine crisis. Of course, some Republicans are critical, some saying that it's too little too late. But it's an uncomfortable position for the Republican Party, criticising Joe Biden's foreign policy on Russia when, of course, they embraced Donald Trump, who has flattered Vladimir Putin on countless occasions, not least since this invasion of Ukraine. But what we heard from Joe Biden last night at this State of the Union address was stuff that we'd largely heard before, but this time it was to a much bigger domestic audience, where he framed this battle between democracy and autocracy. One new step that he did announce, though, was that he's banning Russian aircraft from US airspace, and he vowed to go after Russian oligarchs. He did, though, also express concern about the rise in energy prices and where this war will end. Now, Kamala Harris, the vice president, has been doing the rounds on some of the US networks this morning, and she talked about the impact that Western sanctions is already having on Russia's economy, saying that the ruble has tanked. The stock market in Russia is essentially closed, she said, and that Russia's credit rating is now junk. One thing to look ahead to in around an hour and a quarter from now, the UN General Assembly is reconvening its emergency session in New York in response to this crisis in Ukraine, and we could get a vote on that resolution as early as today, a vote on Russia's actions and a call to the end of their invasion of Ukraine. Of course, what difference will that make? It doesn't seem that Vladimir Putin has given much response, if any, to Western actions so far. And even last night in that State of the Union address, Joe Biden actually acknowledged publicly, first time, that he's not certain where Vladimir Putin is going to stop. Quite a chilling thing for the President of the United States to say. And certainly, at least publicly, Joe Biden has not offered any sort of compromise to Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin hasn't offered any sort of reaction in terms of this Western response and sanctions so far, certainly perhaps figuring that at this stage, having gone this far, he may achieve more by continuing this brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Sally, thanks very much. Well, the Human Rights Council's right now holding its third day of talks in Geneva, with several ministers giving speeches on the situation in Ukraine. Poland's foreign minister called on Russia to stop the war and respect the human rights of the people of Ukraine.
The horror that was imposed on my country's neighbour has already caused deaths and suffering, including among civilians, and constitutes the most deplorable degree of violations of international human rights law. We call on Russia to immediately stop this war, to withdraw troops, and to respect human rights and humanitarian needs of the people of Ukraine according to obligations stemming from international law.
Joining me now is our correspondent Laura Bundock in Brussels, and diplomacy is continuing today, Laura, but is there any suggestion that Vladimir Putin is paying any attention or heed to it?
No, none whatsoever, but that doesn't stop the diplomatic efforts being made in Geneva, and we've been hearing nation after nation making similar statements, similar declarations against Putin's invasion of Ukraine, similar pleas for him to withdraw his forces and to re-engage with the diplomacy. It was interesting hearing the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, when he got up and he said this crisis will only be resolved with political dialogue. So there is very much the hope there that it might end with that kind of political dialogue, but no sign of it yet. One interesting player in all of this is Emmanuel Macron, the French president. He's due to make a state address a little later on this evening. And remember, he has always had a closer, perhaps, relationship with Putin. He's ever since becoming president, tried to develop a special relationship with him. The two have been pictured on a few occasions, notably at the beginning of last month at that huge long table. And there was a phone call on Monday, a 90-minute phone call between the two. Now, Putin, President Macron asking for Putin to stop attacking civilian areas and the like. Clearly that hasn't happened, but I think it's seen as an important relationship because it is at least one communication channel that remains open for now. As I say, though, this diplomatic effort still ongoing, very much a sign that world leaders trying to isolate President Putin, isolate the Kremlin. Is it stopping his actions? Well, it certainly isn't at the moment, because while the diplomacy continues, it's clear that Putin's invasion does too.
Laura, thanks very much. Well, let's get a closer look now at the situation on the ground in Ukraine and the strategic manoeuvres of the war. Let's cross to Kamali Melbourne at the Sky News Centre. Kamali.
Jane, thank you very much. Well, let's now take a closer look at the situation on the ground as Russian forces continue to encroach on Ukraine. I'm joined by Michael Clark, our defence analyst, for a closer look at this. So, Michael, just tell us where we are with the fight for Ukraine at the moment as the Russian forces are arrayed in a number of points around the country.
Yes, I mean, the Russians began this with what I would call a plan B, which was to do it the way Western forces would have done it, with relatively light forces moving quite quickly from the border to surround key areas and moving quickly on Kiev, get rid of the government, declare themselves a new government, and that was all supposed to be done within 72 hours. Hasn't worked. They've made a big mess of it, and the Ukrainians have fought back ferociously. So now they've gone to plan A, which is what they know how to do, which is to move in more slowly with heavier armour, siege trains, as they say, down the Dnieper Valley, as you've pointed out there, in order to surround the big cities. And this has become a war of the cities. It's a north-south war at the moment, but it will revolve around the cities. The Ukrainians can't defend the whole country, so they defended the cities, and the Russians are now moving in on all of those cities.
And we'll focus in on some of the cities in more detail, Kherson, Kharkiv, and the latest news we've got of Mariupol in a moment. But Dnipro is interesting at the moment, isn't it, as well? Because the defender there, the Ukrainian armed forces commander, said something.
Dnipro is an area of about 3 million people. It's a big industrial area. There's about 1 million people in the city. And the leader of Dnipro, Mykola Lukashenko, has said that he said, I've got 1 million people under arms, the Russians are 90 miles away, I will turn this into a new Stalingrad, and I believe him.
Well, that may well happen in the coming days. Let's take a close look at the fight for the south of the country, focusing in on the cities of Kherson, Odessa and Mariupol. Now, let's talk about Kherson to start with. Now, we understand that this city is still being contested by both Russian and, of course, Ukrainian forces, and also Mariupol in recent hours. We've seen the latest from the mayor there saying that the city is coming under heavy bombardment, constant bombardment, and they are running out of water as the Russian forces continue to attack.
Yes. I mean, two key places here. Kherson, where they're still fighting, a major city, and that, again, should have fallen quite quickly, but it didn't. The Russians are clearly trying to create a land corridor between the territories that they held in the Donbass through to Crimea, which was annexed in 2014. Mariupol, right on the edge of the disputed Donbass area, should have fallen within hours. We've been saying that for days now. And according to the Ukrainian government, they are still holding on in Mariupol. I don't know how they're doing it. They're coming under great pressure, but there's some sort of Alamo going on there. At some point, the Russians almost certainly will link up all of this southern area. And then they will start to push north up the Dnieper Valley to unite the north and south of the country, which they hope that they will have taken.
OK. Well, Michael, let's just take a quick look now, if we can, at Kharkiv, where we have seen some more heavy fighting. There has been Russian elements that we understand have lifted into the city, of course, still being defended by the Ukrainians. There was that attack on Freedom Square yesterday as well. So we are seeing that this is under heavy contestation by both sides.
Yeah. Kharkiv, the second city, very important city too. And the Russians look as if they're now adopting their plan A, which is the way they always do these things, which is to surround the city, probably coming at it from the east, airborne drops, we think probably in the west, and they will sit outside the city, bombard the strategic centres as they see them. They won't worry too much about civilian casualties. And then they probably would start to bombard civilian areas in order to break the spirit of the civilians and then just move in. And what happens in Kharkiv in the next 2 or 3 days almost certainly will be what will happen in Kiev probably sometime next week.
OK, Michael Clark, for now, thank you very much. All right, let's throw it back to Jane on the Polish-Ukrainian border.
Well, we're going to talk to Lithuania's Vice Minister of Defence in a moment, Margarys Abuveckis. But let's just take a quick look at what's happening behind us. These trucks have been arriving backwards and forwards throughout the day. They're bringing supplies which are being passed down the line. This one behind me has got nappies, foodstuffs, toilet rolls, those sorts of things. There's just a constant stream of them here at the border coming. But let's bring in the Vice Minister of Defence from Lithuania, Margarys Abuveckis. Very good to talk to you. I understand that our Foreign Secretary, the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, is travelling to Lithuania today and is going to be meeting her counterparts from a number of countries there. How concerned are you in Lithuania about what is happening in Ukraine?
I think everyone is concerned. It's not only in Lithuania. I think in all EU and NATO countries and worldwide, I would say the reaction towards Russian actions is worldwide and very united. So everyone is concerned because we see that Russia does not respect any rules, agreements, and so on. Of course, we saw that this is coming. We saw the aggressiveness of Russia. We saw military integration with Belarus and other similar things. But I think till the last moment, nobody really believed that they can cross this red line. And we see that we crossed this red line with full invasion on Ukraine. And of course, it is worrying.
What about Belarus's involvement, though? Of course, a country right next to yours.
I think when we talk about the current war, we should say that Belarus participates fully in Russian campaign. I'm not talking about their soldiers, but we are allowing their territory to be used by Russian military to fire rockets, to deploy troops, and so on. So in our reaction, we should see that this is a Russian-Belarusian war against Ukraine and against the West.
What do you think the West should do now?
I think we are doing already a lot. I think what is important now in the coming days to continue and to increase military assistance because this is really needed to help Ukrainians to fight back, to withstand Russian actions, and to push back Russians, not to allow them to gain more territory. So this is key, and we should definitely increase that military assistance. Of course, in parallel, the process on sanctions are ongoing, and we are every day communicating more and more heavy sanctions. But I think in a short term, the only thing which can stop Russia is military assistance to Ukraine. They will not stop if Ukraine will not stop them.
OK. Margarys Abuveckis, the Vice Minister of Defence of Lithuania, thank you so much for joining us today on Sky.
Thanks for having me.
As we're here at the Polish-Ukrainian border, we know that almost 700,000 refugees have already fled the Russian invasion. More than half have been arriving at places like this one. Let's bring in, from Lviv in western Ukraine, UNICEF spokesperson James Elder. And James, it does seem I have to say, really quite well organised in terms of people coming. They're being met by people. They're not really having to stand around for a long time, which is fantastic. But, of course, each person coming across here is leaving their life behind, aren't they?
Yeah, spot on. And I'm really glad to hear that because, of course, the people I'm speaking to, the women I was just with at a shelter, have spent the last 2 or 3 nights in bunkers or not in bunkers, but under bombardment in Kiev or Kharkiv. And then they've made that long journey. OK, it's only 500 kilometres, but maybe it's taken them 24 hours in freezing conditions to where I am in Lviv. And then they're at a train station cold, and now they're getting sheltered to that next step to where you are. So I'm really glad to hear that because, yeah, the trauma, the stress, I've seen it before, but maybe not on this scale, not right now. It's just that train station just echoes with tears, as you say, husband and wives farewell each other. Fathers explain to their 7-year-old daughters why dad is leaving and the little girl's off with mum to a country she's not heard of.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, James? And what's striking me is how little they're often carrying. You know, people who've got cars have kind of got loads of stuff packed into those great big sort of heavy-duty shopping bags. You know, they haven't got their cases and stuff. They've just thrown stuff into bags. And people who are on foot are just coming across with what they can carry. It's absolutely heartbreaking. James Ida from UNICEF, I'm afraid we're out of time, but it's really good to talk to you today. Thank you very, very much for joining us from Lviv. You're watching us here now at the Ukrainian border between Poland and Ukraine. It's been a heartbreaking morning, I have to say, watching people coming across here. But at least there are people on the other side to meet them and to try to offer them some help for this next stage in the conflict. Stay with Sky News.